So here we are, back where we all began, all together again. I'm really hoping that you all feeling nourished from the conversations that you've heard and had and the food that you've eaten. And we've invited some people up onto the stage with me right now to be our closing keynote panel. And the frame that we've invited people to talk about include any key issues or reflections on the work that they're involved in around these topics right now. Or people might speak from what has emerged from what we've been listening to today as well. So we might hear from some different perspectives. We've got 3 people up on the stage with me. So first we'll be hearing from Finn Mackay, who is a senior lecturer in sociology at UB Bristol. And is the author of Female Masculinities and the Gender Wars from Bloomsbury, as well as Radical Feminism, Activism in Movement from Palgrave. Finn is an ambassador for the Workers' Educational Association, a director of the British Sociological Association, and a trustee of the Feminist Archive. After Finn, we'll hear from Daniel Guinness from Beyond Equality, who runs group workshops for men and boys in schools, unis, workplaces, prisons and community settings, in which they do gender transformative work, holding discussions about men's roles in gender justice, gender-based violence prevention, mental well-being, and creating more inclusive and supportive groups. And then we'll be ending with one of our organisers of today's event, Abdallah Abdirahamn. He is a physics student at the University of Bristol who has a keen interest in discussions around online masculinities and the manosphere. He's also a member of the committee running the conference to make sure that young men are represented here amongst us all. What I'm going to ask each speaker to do is I'm going to invite them to speak one at a time and ask you to hold your questions. And then when we've heard from all 3, I'll invite questions from the audience, and we'll have a roving mic so that you can all hear you. Cool, okay, Finn, we can start with you.
Wow, okay. Well, thank you very much for inviting me today. It's a real privilege to be here. I suppose, like all of you, my head is swimming with all different thoughts. I mean, dipping into the different topics over the day. And I suppose what occurred, well, lots of things occurred to me, lots of massive rants, but I'll spare you a lot of the rants and I'll just try and focus on a couple of the rants. That it's about, we're talking about power and how power is used in our communities and leadership, transition, ritual, identity. And I suppose from a feminist perspective, I'm always thinking, we're asking these questions, what can a healthy masculinity look like? What will a positive masculinity look like? What will masculinity look like in the future? And to be honest, I think all of those things are a distraction, because I think we need to be asking, what is humanity going to look like in the future? Will it even be here? How can humanity be humane? How can we be humane? How can we be humane people? That is my focus. And what I take from feminist theory as well is that same focus. We need to de-gender. We need to remove biological essentialism from a lot of these debates. Power in our society is usually used over others. So we're used to a model of power that is something you use over others. And I think, how can we get to a situation where power is not something that we use over others to control or for our own gain, but power is something that we can share amongst and use collectively, and where that is not gendered. Another really important mission is to unwed or uncouple masculinity from violence, because of course, as we've talked about it, it's been a strand through the whole of the day. that masculinity is understood through violence, either withstanding it and being able to live through it and kind of stand up and rise again, you know, this idea of being the last man standing, kind of masculinity is rolling with punches and still sort of coming out the other end. Or masculinity is defined by the ability to defend oneself and one's loved ones against violence, or through perpetrating violence against others or against oneself. And so, yeah, why are we asking what will positive masculinity look like? What will positive femininity look like? I feel it's a bit like, this is aging me now, but in The Matrix, where they go, you know, the secret is that there is no spoon. And I go back to what, you know, Lewis said in his excellent opening talk this morning, that gender is creative, and it is also creative, and it should be playful. Indeed, it should. At the moment, it's often life and death, and leads many people to death, and takes many people's lives. And I'm interested in changing that. So I suppose I'm interested in a humane humanity, rather than continuing to gender human expression, you know. And I think that's the danger. Gender essentialism is the danger. We need to remove that. Human qualities are human qualities. We need to make them humane. You know, somebody who is born male is no less in need of receiving love and giving love and care and being a loving, caring part of a community than the next person, just because they happen to have been born and categorised as female. I want to decouple what are humane human values from notions of gender based on arbitrary sex characteristics at birth. That's it.
Thank you for that, and I'm going to pick up on a few pieces you threw out there, which is really the theme of what I've put together. I've tried to pick up on a few pieces that a lot of people have thrown out there. As I was introduced before, I'm Daniel Guinness, Dan, pronouns he, him, from an organisation called Beyond Equality, which is a national organisation, also based in some other places, which is my way of saying I'm probably one of the people here who aren't deeply connected to this area, this city, the people here, the sort of issues that you're dealing with every single day. But on my way in, every time I come to this part of the world, I remember my great uncle who passed away last year, and he spent much of his life in Bristol. And I bring him up because it's generally what I feel when I come into this place, but also because I think some of his story saw him go to a variety of different crossroads in his life. And I like that word from the title of the whole thing, at crossroads. And in those moments with those crossroads, it was that intersection of all his different identities and his interests and his passion and the way that they were treated by people that led him to make different decisions and ultimately end up in some good places and some bad places. I don't want to tell his story too much here, but those, give you an idea. My family's it's a very Christian family, Anglican, and he was a very faith-based man, and he cherished that deeply. He cherished music, specifically playing the organ. He loved gardening. He was a bit cranky sometimes, a little bit hard to get along with. The most miserly person you could ever imagine. He'd make you reuse your tea bag 3 or 4 times, and then wouldn't give you another one. He was also gay, and he was gay in an age where that caused so many issues for him in all those communities and all those spaces that he loved and cherished. And again, it was that way that those communities understood him and assigned meaning to him that limited his choices and forced him to a crossroad where he had to make decisions. And that kind of brings me back to what Finn, if I can call you Finn, was saying, what I heard. you know, and I wanted to throw that, you know, we had that discussion about power, and I think it's been crucial all day long. And there was also the discussion around our identities and, you know, are we trying to move away from gender entirely? And I think and I agree with this, you know, a lot of what we do in our organisation is trying to open up spaces where groups of people can talk to each other and actually bring to the surface all these norms and expectations and pressures that they feel, to understand how those norms and pressures and expectations are leading them towards actions. You know, these scripts, a lot of the people today I think were speaking about scripts and where they lead you and how they're brought on by different things, and the damage that that's doing to the people around them and to themselves and to their friends and to their partners and to their communities. But I think the challenge for us, if we're going to create spaces that can be crossroads in people's lives, to stick with the metaphor, then a lot of us have spoken, or a lot of you, especially I think the youth workers, or the people who are doing counselling, some of the perpetrated projects, have spoken about safe spaces, and ones fueled by empathy and curiosity towards and with the people we're working with. But if we're going to bring people to those crossroads, we've got to really start to actually understand and help them to give their own lives and give this discussion new meaning. And for me, this is the challenge in bridging from the wonderful, I'm going to reuse the word challenge because I just am, that wonderful challenge that Finn gave us of, okay, let's make humans more humane. And can we move past gender in that and not just stay stuck in trying to salvage something from masculinity, but at the same time, the people that I'm working with and the people that my organisation and the youth workers and facilitators work with do really understand themselves and move through their lives as men. And I think it's that bridging work is what we're kind of here at the moment to try to do. And I think I just wanted to throw that word out there of meaning and significance, because I think it's so important to remember that we need to be really I'm repeating those words from the day, but we need to be really interested in how people see their own lives and how they understand their own lives. And that's the step that can actually get us towards behavioural change.
Abdallah, I do physics at Bristol, and my story begins with, so when you're like a kid, you're 8, you don't really think about self-improvement or where your life is going to go in 50 years. You're just like eating food and you're thinking about the next TV show or video game you're going to play. But you come to an age somewhere in teenagehood where you're like, oh God, I'm going to die. I would like, I don't know what your dreams are, but you might want to do something, change the world, or just have a kids and family. And think, I'm not where I need to be to do that right now, which means I have to learn, I have to grow, I have to get better. And you guys might look at magazines or ask your parents. For me and a lot of kids my age, it's YouTube, and that's where this speech begins. So the side of the internet that talks about young men's mental health or health in general is called the manosphere. Back in the early 2000s, you guys might have known it as mainly pickup artistry, so The Game, The Secret, that kind of stuff, teaching men how to approach and interact with women. That has evolved into the red pill. So there's sort of a philosophy and it sort of branches off. So the main idea is sort of a biological view on women's nature, which means that women they're hypergamous, they only date up and across, and they have very judgmental and rigid ways of viewing the kind of men they want to date. And there's 2 ways people respond to that. There's the black pill, where people go, my chance of getting a woman is genetically decided, there's nothing you can do, and then there's the red pill, which is more about, okay, let's see how we can work to reach those standards. Maybe the inspiration is from Matrix, so, you know, Neo being given the blue pill and the red pill. The blue pill is sort of just being a normal human being, and the red pill is what they view as the truth. I think even though they have a lot of ideas that are bad and quite misogynistic, there are some good parts of the red pill in terms of hard work, trying to improve your circumstances, and just try going, I'm in this situation, how can I improve it? I think you'll see this in someone like Jordan Peterson. A lot of his takes are really yikes, I understand that, but I think there's some good core messages there about, you know, working hard and improving yourself, which sometimes people might feel like when you're disagreeing with them, or people who think like it, you're sort of throwing the baby out of the bathwater, and we need to be careful about that. I think something else I'll say on that is that as we'll hit party because there's a real struggle with getting young men into these services, and these communities, these sort of red pill right communities have been really good at that, as much as there's a lot we don't like about them. So we might have to take some ideas from people we mostly don't like to sort of improve our intake. There's also a discussion about the algorithm. So the YouTube algorithm is mainly just about getting you to watch for as much as humanly possible. If you guys probably know about John Ari, in his book Zone Focus, he has a really good discussion about the attention economy, where companies need you to watch for as long as possible so they can show you as much ads as possible, and secondly, they can get as much of your data to sell to advertisers as possible. This interacts with the red pill, where you could talk about like working out. Okay, here's some gym routine to get bigger biceps, or you can bash women. And because of something called the negativity bias, where something that's bad we will look at for longer than something's good, the algorithm will promote the women bashing video more than it will the working out video. So this causes a loop where they put women bashing video out, it gets lots of interaction, in terms of likes, AdSense, and from the algorithm, and then the red pill goes, oh, well this is what's working, and I kind of want to make money from this, so I'm going to do more of that. And it just means more and more of that content gets put out, instead of something that could be more positive. I think on YouTube specifically, there's some really good content on this in forms of, so there's Noah Sampson, he has a great list of videos called the Deep Programming Playlist that just talk about the manosphere in a much greater detail than I could. The people on that playlist are much more informed and smarter than I am, I'll be honest. Specifically, I recommend Mooncat's video. I think it's an hour and a bit long, but it's a really good summary of all the ideas and takes in the manosphere. And then, if you've got a lot of time and you're really interested in this, FT Signifier has got a great 3-part series on what causes these kind of outlooks and philosophies. There's been a lot of discussion in this program about engaging young men and what helps them, and I think this is a problem that is on multiple levels. I think young men need to get out there and interact with real people more. I think though there's problems on the internet, I don't think it can be solved on the internet. We've got to get people outside and working with real people and real mentors. Older people, so that's you guys. needs to make sure that our service is available for young men in terms of checking in on them, making sure they're okay, checking in on their online needs, seeing what are they searching up, what are they looking at. Organizations need to make sure that they're reaching out to young men and providing services that young men want to come to. I think there was an interesting discussion in our Cornerman session about the pre-verbal nature of things, and how young men actually prefer to interact with more physical activities more. They prefer working on something or like improving at something, whereas women are more likely they like talking about stuff better, you know. So we have to make sure that we tailor our services to the people we're providing them to. And the government needs to ideally provide legislation on things like social media, making sure that's under control, and providing funding for organizations who are supporting young men, making sure they have the resources they need to do that. I think a fun thing, as an organizer of the conference, I would like to say is that the only way this fails is if you stop talking. So if there's one thing I personally like to take away is to check in with your young men regularly. You know, a week from now, a year from now, a decade from now, make sure you're talking to the young ones in your, that you know, whether that be one of your kids or someone you work with, or check in on the Reddit, you know, see what they're talking about. You might find they're easier to empathize with than you realize. That's what I'd say.
I like that ending about people who we might not think we would empathise with might be more easy to empathise with than we thought about, and that feels like a key kind of challenge to all of us, of extending our empathy even to those who we might see as harm givers or harm doers. It's something that I take into the work that I do, like, and I expand my compassion even to those who have hurt me the most, because that feels like a path towards the collective liberation that we want. Thank you so much, Finn, Dan and Abdallah. I want to open it out now to those of you in the audience who might want to riff off one of the comments that you've heard. You might have a question for one or all of the people here. And I see your hand in this middle table here. There's a mic just been passed to you.
Hi, this might not be a popular question, but as a professional I'm going to ask it anyway. My question is to Finn. How did you get to the steps and the processes of being able to feel like you can erase the gender identity when looking at identity of young people we work with? Because I kind of aligned a little bit more with Daniel, where we have to talk about humanity and being humane and morals, values, and I think when we work with young people, most of us in the room would align our values and our morals all the same, whether they're female or male. However, many different young people we work with do go through experiences because it's linked to their identity, which is linked to their gender. Whether they choose what they identify as, it does link to that. So I don't think we can erase that completely, because something Abdullah said on the end was women like to talk or listen more and men like to do something else. That comes from society. So society has made us believe that this is the roles that people play. So if we are kind of conditioned as a product of our environment to feel like these are the roles we play, how can we erase that when working with a service user? I think we have to take that into consideration, because it's about them, not about us. So if they want to identify as a gender, we can't move past that when working with them to try and work on what is being feminine, what is being masculine, and how do we overcome some of that. So I just want to kind of unpick how you got to that stage, just because I kind of found that hard to align with, if that's okay.
Yeah, great question. I'm a youth worker by trade as well, although that's quite a long time ago now. And I worked in an intensive supervision sport team with young men in Leeds, in Yorkshire. We have to start where we're at. You know, I'm a realist. we live in a very gendered world. I'm not trying to erase anything. I don't sort of see my approach as trying to take anything away, but trying to offer something and to minimise harm. Yes, we have to start where we're at, right? So yes, we live in a gendered world. It would be a miracle if gender wasn't part of our identity, because we're gendered from before we're born. So of course, it's an important part of our identity, like lots of other things are part of our identity. But I think, yes, we have to start where we're at and we have to reach people where they're at. But we also have a responsibility to look towards where we might be able to get to in the future and what that might look like, so we have a direction of travel. Gendering is a bifurcation of humanity, of the human spirit. You know, if you can read work by psychologists on this, like Carol Gilligan, who write, and then there's gender scholars, C.J. Pascoe, Mark Green. Now they have written as well about the harm to boys and young men that occurs at what Carol Gilligan calls the switching off point. So around about 6 or 7, when boys start to police their own gender displays and the gender displays of others, is a time that can coincide as well with school refusal issues, bullying, attention problems. The gendering in society calls upon us to bifurcate ourselves, to separate ourselves out. So some human values are seen as appropriate for some people based on sex and not as appropriate for other people based on sex. As you said, it's a complete stereotype that women like to talk and men like to play football together, and that's how they express themselves. Some women will want to be more physical, some men would rather sit and talk and not be physical. We need to, everybody's an individual, we can't stereotype by gender. You know, gender is a set of tired stereotypes which is stifling people and cutting people off from themselves and from being a fully rounded person. So I think in the future, yes, we would want to get beyond that. Does that mean I'm saying we mustn't start where we're at? No, of course, we have to start where we're at. We're all gendered, it's an important part of how people understand themselves. Of course it is. But what I worry about is the essentialism, and I worry about the separate species approach, which seems to be going through some sort of resurgence. So I see what I think of as quite sort of pathologizing, stigmatizing language that sort of treats men and women as if we're different species, as if it's some sort of Mars and Venus situation. And I do think that's dangerous. I think it's psychically dangerous, and I think it's physically dangerous. And it exists and it happens to maintain a model of social governance whereby certain groups of men hold power in our society over everybody else. And to maintain that system of power, we sacrifice countless women and girls in many, many ways. And we sacrifice our boys and young men on the streets every night as well. And we don't talk about it. We don't see safety adverts, you know, coming into Christmas. We won't see safety adverts that show boys being attacked. Boys are more likely to be beaten up or, you know, threatened or stabbed on the way home, you know, over the festive season or out in the nighttime economy. Do we see safety adverts portraying boys as weak and vulnerable? You know, that they should make sure they wear trainers, they have comfortable shoes, that they're carrying an alarm, that they've got money to get home. No, that would be seen as laughable. So because we want to maintain an image of masculinity in a certain way, as independent, as tough, as rolling with the punches, as not in the position of prey or victim, we let them crack on. We let them crack on with being killed in the streets because we don't want to upset that narrative. We don't want to change that narrative around. And so the cycle continues.
I think there was just a little bit that I agree with all of that, and that's why I was nodding along. I just thought you meant that we don't need to have the conversation around male-female masculinity, being feminist and being a female. Because what I was saying is we need to have this conversation to eradicate everything that we just said. I such a big role in everything we've just discussed.
Yeah.
So that's,
No, we have to start where we're at, absolutely.
I
And I think it's more important that we do talk about it. And I don't think that men talk about it enough. I think if anything, you know, men need sort of consciousness raising groups in the way that women have gone through from the sort of women's movement. I absolutely agree. We have to start where we're at to try and get to where we might envisage us being.
I wonder if Dan or Abdallah, you want to speak on this point at all?
Yeah.
Dan?
Yeah. I mean, I think this is such a challenging thing for our organisation, speaking very frankly, and I think the challenge is we're trying to start this gender conversation, and sometimes we can fall into the trap of actually coming in, bringing this lens of gender, and almost saying, okay, this is like the binary that's existing here. Here's how this is bad for you. Here's how this is bad for women and girls in your life and in society. And rather than coming in and saying, well, actually, how do you experience your gender in relation to all your other identities? And I think that was coming out so well from a lot of the groups today, being like, you don't have that identity sitting there by itself. It's part of your class. It's how people read you. It's how you understand your culture, what you relate to, all those sorts of things. And that plurality, I can't say that word. We make it more plural and give them those, let them see already that they experience the world differently from each other. And I think that's a really crucial step at also then breaking down the power of this idea of you've just got to fit into that box, that sort of thing. So my summary there is I think that those tools like say the man box, which I think a lot of people use, including our organisation, super powerful, but can sometimes fall in the trap of actually reproducing an idea of there is only one thing, even if we think it's bad. And so if we're doing those sorts of exercises, start to give people a chance to be like, oh, actually, that's not how my dad is, That's not how I experience it, that's not how my cousin is. These sorts of conversations are really fruitful to people. And my last point, which is a little bit different from what you brought in, and exactly what you said, I think lots of the young men and boys we work with love talking. Love talking. It's all we do, basically. You give them an excuse to talk. And and I think it is just giving that excuse and giving them, we're lucky because we can say, hey, we're not your coach, we're not your teacher, we're not your friend, we're with this separate space here and it's different and we're owning that it's different. But I think that can come in a lot more in other places in their life because they enjoy it. And the biggest feedback we get is oh my God, it was fun. I'm having a good conversation with my friends about, my fears and worries about sex, or about my health, or whatever it is.
I think I didn't mean to stereotype. I apologize if I did that. I was just saying that some people, different people in general, will prefer different types of work. Mm-hmm. So some people in general, whether that be men or women, will enjoy, going boxing, working through their feelings through boxing, non-verbal ways of working through their feelings. And I just wanted to make sure that we provision activities for both groups, if that makes sense. So there's how you feel like working through something, there is something for you. Yeah.
Okay, so that's to say that you don't think I should be stereotyped. It comes from somewhere then. So rather than only picking that up because it comes from society, we all have unconscious and conscious bias, so it comes from something that's fed into us. And you just highlighted that for us, actually every day, everywhere we go, is embedded in everything we do. So it's nothing to avoid that, it's what society puts on.
And every single one of us who are practitioners or academics or researchers then hit the wall where you go, oh yeah, no, I just did that. Oh, I'm perpetuating that. And that's the key, isn't it? None of us are sat here going, oh, well, we know it all and it's just them all out there that we need to affect change on. We need to consistently look at ways that power manifests and perpetuates itself, the way that gender manifests and perpetuates itself. And this is a space that I think we've had today where we're exploring those nuances. And for me, I'm constantly coming up against my own unconscious biases and going, oh, hi, I didn't know you were there. We're going to have to go and have a little conversation, aren't we? And that's what's great about this event today, is that we're here having these conversations. Are there any other comments or questions anyone want to riff from thing? Can we bring the mic over here, please?
Outside of work, I do a lot of like podcasts and stuff like that, and I notice the attendance is mainly, like I did one on men talking openly about their thoughts and feelings and emotions, and it was mainly attended by women. Is there uncomfortable sort of feeling that maybe some young boys actually quite like this negative masculinity? They like the power they seem to get, and they don't want to change that? I would say here most of us want to make changes and help that, but for some men, they don't want to change, and is that more uncomfortable? That as a society we've got a large group of men that quite like that power that they get, quite like the old-fashioned, the woman does the cleaning, I just do the house, you know, the DIY stuff, and they quite like those old-fashioned views and sort of behaviours.
Dan, is that you want to riff off that?
Yeah, sure. And I think I'm also riffing off your presentation, because I think you put this challenge out there, which was kind of like, yeah, like there's an appeal to those ideas. And I think some of the challenge that we have in trying to get people to question the ideas coming from the manosphere is that there's a real appeal to them. And some of them are rooted in actually like genuinely paying attention to the issues that people are experiencing and giving them a solution. I would say that often that solution is simple, and it's often a solution that has repercussions that are super damaging. And I think, I mean, you know that in your work, and you know that from what I've heard today. And it kind of reminds me of the last session that was just upstairs, and I think it was in discussion about, and I think it was from the discussion around porn, but it was, sorry, I lost my train of thought. When they're in those moments and they're going along with things, they're not actually reflecting on, do I actually want this or don't I want this? You know, it's kind of like, it feels like they're powerful and it feels like they're reproducing it, but they haven't actually explored, well, in the first place, I didn't have a desire for this. You know, I'm just doing what I was going to be doing. And I think there's a bit of that sort of a trap that people get caught in. And that's like the way you can really be, help them to get that alignment between who they would like to be, you know, broadly, and what their actions are, rather than just what sort of power, you know, what sort of control can they exert over people. How can they solve their problems by getting that quick fix?
I'm not riff on this by saying that I feel there's been a strong undercurrent of economic discussion throughout this program, in terms of, we've all been heard about the cost of living crisis and inflation, and how young people are really struggling to get on the housing ladder, for example, which is a really important part of building wealth with time. I imagine if you're a young person and you're really struggling to like provide for yourself financially or fulfill that part of what you feel like is a necessary part of your masculinity, you might try and venge out in other ways by, you know, being really oppressive, if that makes sense. So,
Finn, did you want to comment on this?
Yes, you know, the majority of people, women and men, don't have power in lots of ways, in financial or structural ways. You know, all of us are ruled by a tiny elite. You know, we come from extremely privileged backgrounds that doesn't, you know, represent the majority of us. So, and I think at times of economic uncertainty, personal uncertainty, ideas of stability become very seductive, and one of those ideas is an idea about an imagined past, which never existed even at the time, but the idea of an imagined past where at least family relationships were stable and gender relationships were stable. And men were men and women were women, and we knew our roles, and at least that. And I think when you have everything thrown up in the air, as we do at the moment, in lots of different ways, you know, economically, environmentally, politically, we've got an anarchic government that flits around from decisions from day to day. It feels rootless, it feels leaderless. And, you know, in such an environment, these ideas, these imagined ideas can gain even more traction. I think we see that in the sort of prophets of patriarchy, like Jordan Peterson and his apostles online. I see it in a resurgent sort of nationalist, racist right wing, which clings to sex and gender conservatism and sells that to people as an area that they can have stability in. Because in society, our model of power looks like having it over people. We're taught to want that. So if you have it, why would you want to give it up? If you don't have it in so many ways, why would you give it up in the ways you have it? And so I think that's the problem, and I think that's, you know, where these kind of figures online, yes, they offer something, and I agree with you in that some of what they offer is not wrong, you know. Is it a good idea for young people in general to feel that they matter to themselves, they matter to others, they can get up and make their bed, they can make themselves a healthy meal, they can look after themselves, they can clean their clothes, they can go out and present themselves to the world? All of those are good, you know, great ethic, good to have, but it's tied up in all these dangerous ideas, it's gendered, it's essentialized, and more to the point, women and girls, and feminism in particular as a movement, is blamed for men's struggles, when if anything, as you say, women are falling over themselves to try and help men. The men in their intimate lives, the men in their friendships, their sons, the men they work with, not least because they're cultured to do so. So the struggles of men are very real, but they're caused by, you know, patriarchal rules about what masculinity and manhood should look like. They're not caused by feminism, but that's the answer given. And that's a simpler answer than a wider discussion about what masculinity means, what heterosexuality means, what our relationships between women and men look like, and that's a much more uncomfortable conversation.
Thank you. I see there are other questions and comments here, but we also want to allow time for people to have conversations with each other as we come together towards the close. And we know it's been such a packed schedule that there's not necessarily been lots of that time for the questions with each other. I'm just going to look to the organisers here around. I'm getting mixed messages as to whether to move on or whether to. Well, there were more than one, so then it becomes hard to discern, and then there might be more, and then it gets dark. And so what were you doing? So yeah, no, there's a burning one. We're going to take it.
I had a question for Abdallah around like incel culture. I think it's really, really important to be talking about that now more than ever. But to sort of say that one of the positives with the black pill, red pill explosion online is like young men, at least they're working out and getting up and making their beds. I do not think there's a worry that they're doing that for female attention and for sexual access. Because working predominantly with young women, if they said, oh, I'm doing this diet or shaving my legs for boys, we're trying to strip that back to doing it for yourselves and empowering the way you want to look, and it not being through the lens of sex and not even sexual acts, but like through the lens of praise and affirmation and value.
Yeah, I think I agree that the reasons why someone does something is important, and even if the answer you get is right, if the process you go there, you get to the answer is wrong, then we still have to address that because it could produce bad outcomes later on. I think I was just pointing out that though it might be fuddled and not expressed correctly or for the right reasons, there are parts of that ethos that meant someone joy, they meant someone joy. We have to pay attention to that. I think that was really important. Does that answer your question?
I'm going to bring us to a close now. I'm going to invite us to thank our panellists for today.